Hi, hello, friends, lovers, and people who are ruining it for the rest of us. Basically, I have just been seeing a lot of Jewish people tweet essentially what was my capstone paper, and I feel like a lot of non-Jews, non-Palestinians are like 1,000 steps behind, as per usual, on the conflict. And even though I did kind of think that my capstone was embarrassingly bad, I did not only pass my international relations course, but I also used this paper in my master's degree application and they let me in, so can't be that horrendous. So we just gotta sort of get right into it, get everyone caught up to where we are. If I was going to explain every important part of this conflict, we would be here all day. So I'm going to recommend that you go and watch the collab that I did with Cringy on my channel to sort of get a sweeping overview of 2,500 years of history. I'm also not going to get into the details of land ownership, like who owned what when, because I'm sure that there has just got to be a crash course video out there that is good and can do that for you. I just don't have the interest in trying to consolidate what's gotta be at least 8 years of my knowledge and lived experience of going to Israel and having conversations with Israelis and Palestinians and doing my international relations course and doing a number of different Jewish history things, or even just a general history class. There's just a lot, and trying to sort through it in my brain would take a billion years. This video would never get to you. So if that is what you came here for, bookmark this video and come back once you feel like you are caught up to speed, I guess. I'm gonna explain a little, but I can't cover everything, and there's a lot in there. I'm also not even really gonna get into the intricacies of what's going on right now, because events are unfolding so rapidly, but the meat of what is in this video is not changing rapidly, so if you do really want me to sort of give an overview of what's happening right now, possibly I could go on a live stream, but I've never done that before. And also I can't guarantee that this is even a thing that people want from me, because the news exists, and I know in my heart and my soul, in my bipolar disorder, I know everything all the time and am right. But the news can also be right sometimes. But what's going on right now is not this video. That would be so much easier for me to explain if prompted with direct questions about what people want to know, which is why I was thinking live stream. I think that this is extremely important for you to know, for us to get on the same page before we go any further. And that's, if you are not Jewish or Palestinian, please do not talk about the conflict. And I have reasons. I'm not just saying this. Did a British person tell me yesterday, that's so rude of you to tell me that I'm not allowed to use my platform to speak up about this. I'm sorry, but the woman who said this to me, 1, only had 2,000 followers. I don't have more than that, but that's not a platform. And 2, this now marks British person number 4 that I have called out for doing or saying something anti-Semitic. And they've been like, I'm talking about the conflict, and it's my right as someone who is completely separated. So let me actually fucking explain. Hold on. I don't need to be so angry. Let me explain my reasoning for this. More often than not, so probably a disgusting amount, more often than not, non-Palestinian goyim end up speaking over us and offer prescriptive, harmful solutions that are actually not solutions and are really just a soft extension of colonialism. Jews and Palestinians both have ancestral roots in Israel-Palestine. Jewish people were uprooted about 2,000 years ago, and many Palestinians were expelled between 1948 and present day. Although I have never heard a Palestinian person describe themselves as diasporic, I do personally believe that it is fair to say at this point that both Palestinians and Jews are people of diaspora. They just began at different times. And boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. This one's more important, honestly. It's more important. You cannot apply American or Western understandings of racial relations, race theory, and colonialism to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And this is partially because, yeah, we're all from there, so, but also because that does put a nice little ideological wedge, and utilizing that same framework of colonialism is fucked for a number of reasons. One, because it denies that we're from there. And two, because, you know, we know white people from Europe went to Africa, colonized Africa, and screwed up the world as we know it. Or, you know, the Americas, or certain parts of Asia. But the colonizer, or oppressor, or perpetrator in all of these examples are the white people. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, in the Israel-Palestine conflict, who's the white person? I need like a little meme. Every time we end up in a little trap where the understanding of Jewish history, where Jews are from, what like horrible stereotypes and conspiracy theories exist against us, I need like basically like a bad equivalent of when Alexis Mateo goes bam, like that. Bam! Because that's my moment right there. Because you know the answer. None of us needed to say it because that's what's being implied there. You just can't use that framework because it also means that someone's right and someone's wrong. And I will be explaining why that doesn't work, why that actually does more harm than good as we continue on. I'm gonna have to get in. Where this is a political theory video? Did you know that this is about international relations? Oh my god, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I am talking so much and being so annoying, and I have so much of this video to get through. I will survive. Gloria Gaynor. Part of the reason why it's very popular for progressives or people on the left in the West, tongue twister, is because of some history. So it's history hour. So 2,000 years ago, Jews were expelled from our homeland, which today is Israel-Palestine. If you were going to take like a very middle of the road sort of approach to the map, which is what we're going to do, you've got Gaza, you've got Israel, and then you've got the West Bank. Some of the zones are like co-governed by Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I don't totally know the breakdown of the zones, but when I say we were expelled from there, I mean like the whole area, but mostly Israel and like the West Bank-y area, which is part of why the settlements keep happening. That would have to be an explainer video. That's not this. So I'm gonna try and do like a comprehensive, broad overview of where we went after we were expelled. A very large number of Jews went to Europe. This is probably the most well-known group of Jews, aka Ashkenazi Jews. That's what I am. Shout out Eastern Europe. You guys gave us the grossest food, but at least you gave us Yiddish. Ashkenazi Jews were the brunt of the Holocaust and obviously the Russian pogroms. Shout out Fiddler on the Roof. Shout out my maternal family skedoodling to come to the US and start an Orthodox synagogue. I don't know if that actually happened because I never heard that they did. We all know it was to not die. And I know lots of people like to talk about Israel existing because of the Holocaust. Israel was already in the works before the events of the Holocaust. I do think I also kind of explained that in my collab with Cringy. But many, if not most, Jews who escaped before and after the Holocaust happened actually came to the US and not Israel. Only Yenta the matchmaker went to Israel.
Well, Anatevka hasn't exactly been the Garden of Eden.
And another chunk of Jews who left during the expulsion 2,000 years ago went to Spain and Northern Africa, probably mostly northwestern Africa. And these are what's known as the Sephardi Jews. Y'all remember the Spanish Inquisition?
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
That's these guys. They had to flee or die. And then when they skedoodled after the Spanish Inquisition, a lot of them ended up in southwestern France. More Jews in northern Africa, yes. and surprise, surprise, the Middle East. Which brings us to our other main cultural/ethnic group of Jews. And these people stayed in the Middle East and are called Mizrahi Jews. This includes Jews who had settled in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran. There's actually like a very large insular group of Syrian Jews today in Brooklyn. But also many Persian Jews, aka Jews who are living in Iran, came to the US after the 1980s revolution. Shout out Persepolis. That's the only reason that I know this info. And so today there's actually like a huge community of Persian Jews in Los Angeles. But to get back to why I was even telling you about Jewish ethnic breakdowns, I guess, is that overall most Israelis are Mizrahi. A study done by the International Institute of Social Studies in 2005 found that 61% of Israelis are Mizrahi. This also doesn't account for Ethiopian Jews, many of whom live in Israel now, or the Kaifeng Jews, who I believe mostly sort of like their population really dwindled, so they're a much smaller group of Jews. But I brought all of this up to reiterate something that I am sure I have said on here before, and I definitely recently said in an Instagram story, which is that you cannot just transplant American understandings of racial politics into the Israel-Palestine conflict. And if you do, you just look stupid. Like, are you really gonna say that Syrian Jews are white just because all the Jews that you're familiar with are Ashkenazi? Like, because then you might as well be calling Palestinians white as well, because Mizrahi Jews and Palestinians are from the same area. See why that's kind of stupid? It's more than fair to call Ashkenazi Jews white, because I mean, there is not that much of a difference between my face and this cup.
I look like one of those white gourds that you paint at Halloween.
But it's too black and white, especially when you consider which group of Jews is mostly living in Israel. It's just like not fair to them or their history, and is like kind of abrasive. I don't like it. Clearly, Jews are from Israel. Verified historical fact. And Palestinians are just non-Jews who were also living there the whole time and weren't expelled by the Romans. So now we can kind of go from here. Like, none of us should be kicked out again. I mean, I personally think it should be an inherent human right to get to live safely in your ancestral homeland. If any group of people is expelled from where they are living today, that is going to create generational trauma and also, like, just create more problems. So, like, stop kicking people out. So now we kind of are up to speed with where everyone's from. The majority of frameworks that we're accustomed to in social justice in the US and probably also in England just are not transferable. So I'm really just gonna need us to take that one, throw it out the window. I've been seeing a lot of moronicity on the timeline, and I'm not happy to see it. In March of 2018, I was very lucky to be able to travel to Israel in order to meet with Israeli and Palestinian activists, politicians, journalists, and professors to learn about the conflict from a wide variety of perspectives and political views. And I want to tell you something very striking, at least to me, that I was told. But first I need to, explain to you who these two people were who told this to me in the group that I was with. The first is Benjamin Anthony, who founded Our Soldiers Speak and immigrated to Israel from the UK, partially as a result of an experience he had where he and his brothers were brutally attacked, physically attacked, by a group of anti-Semites on their way to school. Benjamin Anthony was 14 when this happened, and their attackers were adult men. He's relatively conservative. And the other person, whose name I do apologize in advance if it's not perfect pronunciation, is Khaled Abu Tuameh, an Israeli Arab journalist who was born to an Israeli Arab father and Palestinian Arab mother. He grew up on the Green Line in an Israeli Arab town near Haifa. And he has written for a conservative think tank, but I still personally think that he is more moderate than Benjamin Anthony. And what both of these men told us is that it's all well and good for people outside of the Middle East to want to know what is going on in the Israel-Palestine conflict and to care about what's happening. But unless you are actually living there, your life is not at risk, and therefore you do not get to have a say. You don't really have anything at stake, so you shouldn't be talking. First of all, another BAM moment. I loved it when they told me this. Actually, I didn't. I hated it at first. But, you know, personally, I was told this and I'm still in denial that I process things for a long time after they either happen to me or are told to me. And this is definitely one of those cases. I think I disagreed with them for a long time until I came home, processed the whole trip. And now I do, like, very much see what they are saying. And, like, honestly, pretty much agree. And I know you are probably thinking that I am not Israeli, and I am not, and I will get there in a second because I want to slightly adjust this. And I also want to expand a little because the only people who can and should solve the Israel-Palestine conflict are Israelis and Palestinians. That is the only way that a solution would last. Almost definitely. And I also think that as diasporic people, Jews and Palestinians worldwide can have thoughts and feelings on the conflict. But those thoughts and feelings should not be at the forefront of this conversation. That really should still be Israelis and Palestinians who are living there. Because lasting peace is really just like an abstract possibility for those of us living in the diaspora. But it's actually a practical life and death issue for people living in Israel and Palestine. I would love to sit here and say that non-Palestinian goyim are what is standing in the way of lasting peace, but unfortunately, that's not true. They're really not the main problem. They're mostly just annoying. No hate. I, for one, am extremely annoying, so I get it. But I do want to bring to you the main tweet that was idea theft. It's not, my capstone was not an original thought, but it's been very amusing for me to, having recently read my capstone, be kind of basically seeing the same idea all over social media. Ethan Klein the other day tweeted his thoughts on the Israel-Palestine conflict, which I am bringing this to you, not just because he's a fellow Jew. How are you doing, fellow Jews? But, oh my god, I just got so heated. Oh my gosh, I just remembered that Ethan met Gila on his birthright trip because she was one of the soldiers on his trip, and I'm so angry. And you might be thinking, oh, well, you're mad because he went on birthright. Sir, this was like the 80s or 90s when birthright began. I am mad that Ethan found love on birthright. That's like the whole point. And what did I get? The only other lesbians that I met the 3 times that I was there, the only other lesbians were like 50 years old. How come he got to find love on a 10-day trip and I didn't? Birthright stands for it's your right to fall in love in a foreign country with another Jewish person, not whatever that is. It is a human right for me to fall in love while I am traveling. Gonna read it word for word. The Israeli government is making me sick. Even if Hamas is operating out of a civilian building, it does not justify the total destruction of that building. It's inhumane. Netanyahu is a piece of shit warmonger and needs to go. As a dual citizen, I love Israel and the Israeli people. They deserve a government that actually believes in peace and not force and violence. Yes, King, go off! The ultra-right Jewish settlers are among the greatest provocateurs in the world. They are shameless and hateful, fueled by religious zeal and enabled by the Israeli government. I wish the settling and repossession of Palestinian land would stop. I wish the bombing in Gaza would stop. Gazans deserve to live a life free of fear. For all of the crimes Hamas has committed, we must always remember that they are not Palestine. The Israeli government holds all of the power, and it is on them to stop the violence and show a true willingness for peace. Wig, Ethan, I would like the intellectual property of my capstone back, please. I don't actually love the end of this tweet. I feel like Ethan's kind of giving a little too much of a free pass here to not fully blame Hamas and the Palestinian Authority for continuing the conflict, or the just like heinous everyday treatment of Gazans by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. I think Ethan bungled my capstone paper, I'll say it. Not only theft of my brain, but also bungling the explanation. Absolutely not today. So because this is probably like a little confusing to people who are not super familiar with the like more contemporary political history, I'm gonna kind of like try to explain who owns what. Hamas has jurisdiction over Gaza. They are a terrorist organization straight up. They were founded in the 1980s to protest Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the PLO, or the Palestine Liberation Organization, because they disagreed with Yasser Arafat's decision to enter into a peace agreement with Israel during the Oslo Accords, even though that deal relinquished Israel's control over Gaza. But then they were like technically elected to lead Gaza in 2006. But then they kind of threw a coup against the Palestinian Authority, or the PA, as I'll probably continue to refer to them, in 2007, and then they have refused to have an election since, to the best of my knowledge. They straight up do not believe that Israel should exist. Do you also think that Israel should not exist? Maybe think about that one for a hot sec, though. Think about it before you say it. I have also, in my real life, been told that this belief also extends to Jews worldwide, but that also may or may not have been my mom telling me that Hamas believes that. Will I verify that? Hopefully, I remember to. Hamas gets resources and aid from places like Qatar, Turkey, and yes, even Israel. But shocker, Hamas's leaders don't actually care about Palestinians, so they stockpile these resources and very often use them as leverage in order to get regular people living in Gaza to put their lives on the line in order to receive like food, water, safety, possibly also electricity. I'm gonna say that it is inappropriate to say that Hamas terrorizes Israeli Jews without also acknowledging that they do terrorize their own people. All my homies hate Hamas, like what can I say? They're the worst. So then we also have the PA, Palestinian Authority, which has jurisdiction over the West Bank. Like I said, I don't totally know what the zones break down to over there. The PA is currently led by Mahmoud Abbas, who has been president of Palestine since 2005. Just gonna let that one sink in. There's a lot of like complicated stuff in there with him. Like he got into power in 2003 because other countries wanted him to be in power instead of Yasser Arafat. But he also opposed the first Intifada, which I'm pretty sure most Palestinians were like, yeah, we should have this Intifada. I'm pretty sure. He wanted to create a Palestinian army, you know, like an organized one, but then like 3 seconds later resigned and was like, Israel, the US, and Yasser Arafat made me resign. Like, are you a fucking child? Come on. And also basically everyone and their mother believes that Abbas is guilty of corruption and embezzlement, but no one seems to have really done anything about it, to the best of my knowledge. So yes, just another Palestinian governing body failing the actual people. Which brings us to Israel. So Abbas and Netanyahu are like two peas in a pod. Netanyahu is Israel's current prime minister and the leader of the Likud party, which is a conservative, very conservative party in Israel. And he's been the prime minister since 2009. Despite Benny Gantz and whatever party he's in, I can't remember, beating Netanyahu and the Likud party in several elections over the last year and a half. I don't like our two-party system here, but based off of what's going on there, I also really don't like the way that parliamentary coalitions have to be done, because we keep getting stuck with Netanyahu. I don't even think I could name one person who likes him, or at least not one person that I respect. Netanyahu has actually been charged with corruption, unlike a boss. Unlike a boss. I hate myself! And to be quite honest, Ethan is right that the Israeli government has encouraged religious zealots to settle in the West Bank. And it's not cool and it's not nice. And I know that the reason for doing that is that there is quite a bit of land in the West Bank that was part of the biblical territory of Israel. And, like, all the religious people are like, we have to have all of that land, or else the Messiah won't come. I'm not wild about a Messiah. Not really. Don't really. I'm kind of feeling like I don't want one. Very sexy, very good that we are now getting into political theory territory. I really do believe that there are basically two main problems that are acting as barriers and making the Israel-Palestine conflict unsolvable. The first of which is spoilers, which is basically any actor or group of actors in an international conflict or civil war that could or actively works to undermine a peace agreement, or like even break it. Stephen John Stedman is the person who sort of came up with the terminology of spoilers. And so I'm gonna read you this little excerpt from the paper where he wrote about it. Peace processes create spoilers. This is a statement about definition and causality. In war, there are combatants who can be identified in a myriad of ways. For example, rebels, bandits, pariahs, rogues, or terrorists, but not as spoilers. Spoilers exist only when there is a peace process to undermine. That is, after at least two warring parties have committed themselves publicly to a pact or have signed a comprehensive peace agreement. Peace creates spoilers because it is rare in civil wars for all leaders and factions to see peace as beneficial. Even if all parties come to value peace, they rarely do so simultaneously, and they often strongly disagree over the terms of an acceptable peace. A negotiated peace often has losers, leaders and factions that do not achieve their war aims. Nor can every war find a compromise solution that addresses the demands of all the warring parties. For example, the most perfectly crafted power-sharing institutions in the world are useless if one of the parties does not want to share the power. Even the best designed settlements may be attacked by leaders and parties who decide that the kind of peace in question is not in their interest. Custodians of peace processes confront several different spoiler problems, which differ on the dimensions of the position of the spoiler, inside or outside an agreement, the number of spoilers, the type of spoiler, limited, greedy, or total, and the locus of the spoiler problem, leader, followers, or both. And so there's a myriad of spoilers at play here. A total spoiler wants total power, not gonna compromise. A limited spoiler has a few things that they are really set on, and they're not going to budge on those. But that's all that they care about. And then a greedy spoiler will try to take more and more and more if the risk is low. In my view, Hamas is a total spoiler. I know they are a terrorist organization, but they have signed ceasefires in the past with Israel, and that is a step of a peace agreement. Plus, they are also literally in charge of that land. So, whereas the PA and Abbas are more limited spoilers because they certainly don't care that much in the grand scheme of things. And Netanyahu's Israel is probably a greedy spoiler, considering how the expansion of the state seems to be more and more of a priority. But they also really could be considered a total spoiler. However, these are not the only spoilers. People on both the far right and the far left of political extremes are both spoilers. Mostly, in Israel-Palestine. Some Americans who make financial contributions to the Israeli government are limited spoilers. Many people on the left in the Western world, especially young people who are online, I think pose a significant spoiler threat, although they are a limited spoiler. So keeping that in mind, I do want to look at a specific Twitter thread. This is all coming from Yossi Schwartz, assuming that that is how you pronounce it. I don't really know. I have yet to begin my Hebrew classes. Yossi Schwartz wrote this thread in response to an article from Jewish Currents, which is a left progressive Jewish publication. He started it off by saying that he was terrified by what Jewish Currents' tweet, if not the entire article itself, represents. And what's written there is, after a full and true accounting of all that has been and is being taken from us, the Nakba will demand its justice, end the ongoing genocide of Palestinian people, and give it all back. So, let's get into it. Let's get into the thread. I love this thread. Israel knows how to defend itself from conventional war. It has 3 times, in 1948, 1967, and 1973, prevailed in a war against multiple armies on multiple fronts, and Israel has learned how to fight an unconventional conflict, quelling terror within its borders almost entirely. The real struggle for our existence, however, is now being fought online, in the virtual world, where most people form their views of the world, and here I believe Israel is really and truly outgunned. 3 elements conspire against Israel in this battle. 1. There are at most 14 million Jews in the world. That's only 1/3 of the Arab population, for example. 2, there are deep wells of anti-Jewish sentiment and assumptions on which to draw. And 3, intellectual currents have again turned against the Jews. He only spoke facts. What we are seeing now, quite clearly, is a movement by elite opinion makers to supply the conceptual material that will be used in the war to destroy Israel. The manufacture has been happening for decades in the academy, and for example, the London Review of Books. But now, with the shifting intellectual currents, there's now a mass interest in abstruse and tendentious ideas like settler colonialism. Yes! You guys already got my shtick that it is bad to continue using that verbiage or framework. For example, Jews are thieves. Memes that have been manufactured in laboratories of ideas are now flooding the online world like the viruses they are. And I tell you this as an Israeli and a lover of the Jewish people, I don't see how we can survive this onslaught. When mixed with the deep strains of anti-Jewishness in the Western bloodstream, these ideas and arguments are far more lethal than any conventional weapon. A world that collectively arrives at the conclusion, once again, that the Jews are a gang of perfidious thieves and baby killers, and the source of its woes, can in short order wrest our state from us. And that is what the article above aims to persuade you of. Which is why, of course, it is being pushed out now when Israel is again at war. My plea is this: if you find yourself concluding that yes, the Jews are baby killers and thieves, remind yourself that the same was believed by every generation preparing to slaughter us. Every mob and squad that came to destroy Jews and Jewish collective life believed it was on the side of the blameless victims of the Jews. Please dig deeper. Read more and differently. Think harder. Speak to any Zionist Jew. And pray for Israel. That's such a fucking sad thread. Oh my god. This is why I don't read out loud, because things are just even more sad when you do. And what Yossi Schwartz is saying is right, because I'm seeing it, my friends are seeing it, that this war has moved like into the intellectual and online. I mean, not entirely, obviously. Yeah, the swords are drawn yet again at the Jews. And what's funny about it is that in this macabre way, the Western left is like an obscured, limited spoiler, whose goal is for Palestinians to become a total spoiler and to egg on the end of the state of Israel. And they're not even stakeholders. Crazy how the internet can make people who are not involved feel like they are. If you look at it in this super zoomed out, vague way, it does really just start to feel like their end goal is anti-Semitism. I do want to insert 2 action items here that are probably going to be super helpful to people who are not Jewish or Palestinian. The first one is you're not helping as much as you think you are by spreading awareness. People are aware, I promise you. It's pretty hard to not be aware of an almost 100-year-long conflict, but don't share information just because you're worried people will be mad at you if you don't. Like, don't white knight and don't virtue signal. It is insulting. And 2, Zionist is not a bad word. Don't censor it. I saw the most anti-Semitic TikTok the other day, and it censored Zionist. I was so mad. This is that same girl from the beginning of the video who I was like, hey, British people, if someone who's Jewish is telling you that you're being anti-Semitic, you actually might be. Yeah, sometimes people are fucking bad. Sometimes people are assholes and anti-Semites. And turns out that that one person on Instagram absolutely was. I'm so mad. Don't censor the word Zionist and don't share things that are censoring it. Signals that it's a bad thing or a bad word or a fucking slur. Not something that many Jews are happy and proud to be. And also, if you can replace the word Zionist with Jew and it reads as hateful to Jewish people, don't post it. I know I told you earlier, please don't post about us if it's not coming directly the fuck from us. And I mean that, but I know I can't control everyone's phones because I live in a society. But, I have fucking reasoning for what I'm saying. Doing either of these things is actually increasing external spoilers and is not helpful. And there's not enough hours in the day to explain how increased hatred of Israel and Zionists ends up resulting in way more acts of violent anti-Semitism in the real world, but it does. Now we're getting into the stuff that I love, which is that I firmly believe that Israelis and Palestinians living in Israel-Palestine are not spoilers. And there are many Jews and Palestinians living in the diaspora who are deeply invested in the possibility of lasting peace and will benefit if it is achieved. And I believe that these people are trying not to be spoilers. Which brings me to what I firmly believe is the other barrier, the separation of Israelis and Palestinians. Finally, I get to talk about the world's best documentary ever made, called Promises. If you have never seen Promises, go watch it. It will change your life. Yes, I watched this in world history. I was shocked that we were watching something good. And, it's so good. I'm literally obsessed. Basically, that documentary, it's like a social experiment, but it's related to all this. So, when I was in Israel in March of 2018, I also got to learn from Walid Issa. He suffered a horrible loss at the hands of IDF soldiers in the West Bank where he was living, and he ended up putting himself into, dangerous situations trying to get back at Israelis. And he ended up getting into an exchange program, which put him, and he ended up in an exchange program where he got to live in the US, and as a result was able to learn about the intricacies of the conflict from outside of the actual fight that he was living. And he was able to speak to Jewish people and learn why Israel is so important. He kind of ended up living like an individual version of Promises, and he came to the same conclusion. And I can't remember the name of his nonprofit, but I know he started one. The physical separation of Israelis and Palestinians makes it so much easier to breed animosity and hostility, and it makes it so much harder to come to a lasting agreement. And the governing bodies, all three of them, they know this. They lean into it. Hamas absolutely leans into their ability to propagandize, because if you can't see your adversary, it is so much easier to believe horrible things about them. But like I said, this isn't about who's good and who's evil and who's right and who's wrong. All people involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict need to collaborate and work in partnership with one another in order to have lasting peace. So you can't operate in that us versus them way of thinking, because it makes you want to compromise or work together so much less. There has to be a really good solution at this point in order for the violence to stop. And I don't want to provide a solution because I do not live there, but I think that the best way to lock in an end to violence is Palestinian and Israeli co-governance. Like, if the state fails, it's because of a failure to work together. That kind of, anything that would make that sort of be the thing. Because it's important for us to move forward towards a solution with respect and compassion for one another. Because without that, it's hard to even get to where you can meet in the middle. But what is vital, in my opinion, is the necessity of mutual survival. If there's a sense that, kind of like the opposite of like the Voldemort Harry Potter thing, you know, neither one can live while the other survives, basically the inverse. Neither can live if one doesn't survive. Does that make sense? That's not a sentence. You know what I'm saying? Because sort of like if you're in a situation where you understand that you need to work together in order to survive yourself, then it sort of puts you in a bind where it makes it that much more difficult to destroy or eliminate who you might see as your adversary, because you need them to survive. And you want to survive. And like, what I came here to talk about was lasting peace. I know there was, for a long time, value in a two-state solution, or maybe even still is. But in being aware that both Hamas and the Israeli government are or can be total spoilers, it means that a two-state solution would almost certainly just lock in violence, make violence the norm, and not actually end it. Because it would establish an us versus them dichotomy that would just perpetuate violence. Personally, I really feel like an integrated society with Palestinians and Israelis co-governing, living together. I know a lot of towns in Israel that are Israeli Arab towns are like literally just Israeli Arabs live there, and like right next door is a town with Israeli Jews, and they don't even go to school together. They don't even shop at the same stores. That's not gonna work. There needs to be that continued interaction with the other in order to foster compassion for your neighbor. And I think that can't be understated enough. Did my professor not enjoy that in my capstone? Yes, she did not like it. She was like, this is therapy and not international relations policy. Yeah, I know, but it's so important. By not valuing how actually integral regular interaction between Israelis and Palestinians is going to be in terms of like reducing animosity towards one another, it is going to make lasting peace so much more difficult to achieve. Israelis and Palestinians are people, not just sort of like something that can be solved on a page. Co-governance in an integrated society would help to break down that huge separation between both groups that acts as a barrier in terms of not just like physical proximity, but emotional connection that is really actually very integral to achieving peace that goes beyond just a simple ceasefire that usually doesn't even last that long. And like a single state of Jews and Palestinians does not have to be the only solution. I'm not the solutions guy. I'm the big ideas guy. But Jews and Palestinians are not going anywhere, and they shouldn't be forced to go somewhere. I just really feel so strongly that coalition building will be a fucking game changer. And I'm right. I'm right about this. The right for Israelis and Palestinians to vibe, to just hang out. I could also go on and on about the millions of failed mediation attempts, which is actually really what the capstone was on. Generally speaking, the major players who have mediated agreements between Palestinian governing bodies and Israel, and like sometimes other countries as well, are the UN and the United States. And I really think that that's a big problem, because the UN has a huge bias towards Palestinians. So therefore, Israel is going to be inherently more distrustful if the UN is a mediating body. And the reverse is true of the US, because their bias is towards Israel. And in my perfect world fantasy, there is no mediating body, and Israelis and Palestinians just create a new government together from the ground up, but like that's not realistic. But I told you, I'm not your solutions guy. If someone else wanted to step in and mediate, that might be more successful, possibly. I don't have high hopes. And I would love for Israelis and Palestinians to dismantle what's going on governmentally together so that they're their interests could actually be represented and that they wouldn't be taken advantage of by the government. But the problem with that is that the easiest way to make that happen would be for a foreign nation to come in and offer military aid. But like, that's actual colonialism. So not gonna work. Like, remember what the US did to Iran? Because thanks, we don't want it. That's not actually gonna help. It's sort of gotten to this like desperate situation where Israelis and Palestinians have to do this for themselves because everyone else's help has just made things worse. But like, that is not easy and requires ridiculous amounts of collective organizing that might not really be feasible. So here's a quote that I took directly from my capstone paper. Political scientist Daniel Rothchild posited that the successful implementation of peace agreements after a civil war requires overcoming predatory behavior, addressing deeply held grievances, and assuaging security fears, which I think is kind of exactly what I talked about. And you don't have to view this conflict as a civil war, but I really think that that is the best framework. I hope this video was helpful to you in terms of explaining, like, why is it still going on? Because, oh my God, will it ever stop? If you're living outside Israel-Palestine and you're looking to help right now, my best advice would be to like donate to organizations that are providing basic necessities and life-saving materials like food, medical supplies, etc. But at the same time, the truth is that Israel is giving those things to Gaza, but Hamas is not doing the resources the way that a good government should. I would say maybe reach out directly to a nonprofit that works within Israel-Palestine to see what more specifically they could use help with. Yeah, just because, like I said, on the outside, can't and shouldn't be solving the problem, because then it's just gonna continue what hasn't worked. And things like boycotting are especially unhelpful, but that explanation would require another video that hopefully won't take 2 hours to film. And I know many other people have talked about this before. I implore you to look into how the BDS movement is actually anti-Semitic, but also, probably more importantly, not that anti-Semitism isn't important, but it's like the more immediate problem with boycotting Israeli products and Israeli companies is that the Israeli and Palestinian economies are so interconnected that you end up actually hurting Palestinians in your goal of hurting Israelis. So it doesn't actually work. And let me tell you, boy oh boy does that economy scare me. And their economy is already not something I would say is incredible. Would not say it's great. Granted, the economy here in the US is horrendous. So, God, all things are just bad on... Oh no! So I mean, like you would be hurting Palestinians. Mostly Palestinians in the West Bank, because many of them have to actually come into Israel every day to work. That is another whole lifetime of a video. It would take so fucking long to explain it all. But also, to put on my Mr. Practical hat for a second, it's not realistic to boycott Israeli companies because say goodbye to your phone and say goodbye to like 50% of all recent medical advancements. It's not worth it. It's a waste of time and is more hurtful than it's helpful. As people not living in Israel-Palestine, we want to be helpful. We see the suffering. We have empathy. But, you know, some things just aren't good solutions. Like I said, if you want explanations about what's going on right now, I could do that in a live stream. So just let me know if that's a thing that you want. Because this was theory and not news. But, like, if that is a thing that you want and would find helpful, just let me know. Israelis, Jews, and Palestinians worldwide all deserve dignity, physical safety, and respect. My hope is that you guys agree with me, at least on those points, and we'll keep that in mind if you choose to do any activism for Palestinians and or Israelis in the future. I know, this was so much, this was a lot. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do whatever makes you happy. Just please don't be hateful. If you can Especially not in the comments, because I would prefer not to see people being terrible. Wouldn't that be nice for me? Wow. Oh my god, that was so much. There was a lot of anger, mostly at the fact that I was not able to find love on Birthright. I hope you are able to just relax after this, because wow. Thank you for taking the time to sit through and watch this video. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Whoa, whoa, Mamma Mia.